That's better.
I think there's one over there. I guess Maureen has one. I think you only need one more.
There's a horrible little chair here, but we're better than steal it. You do have bigger rooms. Stuart was telling me earlier the group was getting bigger. Days went by, yeah.
We got room for another chair in here too.
Okay.
Sorry.
I was using
Yeah,
it as an umbrella.
I don't.
Yeah, I realized when I got out of the car, I haven't had a jacket in the vehicle for 2 months.
Fill that out.
Been a while.
I have my Tilly hat, and I thought, I'm going to leave it. This part doesn't matter, but.
Do we, I really need Ben in here.
Now we need it. Yeah.
Okay, I need you guys in here.
Could we just move that chair? Yeah,
Here, you can move in there.
perfect. Yeah, that'd be great. Just so I can keep recording.
Okay, do you guys mind if I just do a quick intro?
I don't know if she wants this like audience or I'm not sure.
Okay, come on in, whoever wants to come on in.
Do you think so?
You want to shut this door? Or?
No, leave it open, there might be more people that show up. Absolutely. Go around the circle, start.
Okay, hi. I'm Cheryl Gray. Construction in Balfour. I met a couple of you yesterday at the dialogue, so but I've really not seen too many familiar faces here. So I love to cook and I'm working 2 jobs right now. And this is all new to me, so I'm really glad that you guys are here so that we can, hear your concerns and we can listen. And that's the main thing.
So I'm Barry Jackman. I'm the Area A Director of Windell East Shore Kootenai Lake. And in a way, I guess I'm one of the older dogs on the board. This is my 5th term elected. In the 6th term I've been involved because there's an alternate director before that, so back quite a few years. And Stuart and predecessors, when you were Chief Financial Officer, would recognize it was Andy, and me who were always pretty aggressive over the budget. So I'm probably as familiar with the budget and where we're at and why we're at as anybody on the board, I would say today, period. And I have some context to offer. And I'm also chair of the Rural Committee, which we represent more than 50% of the regional district population and the vast majority of services. It's stick handling what comes and goes in that agenda also gives me a little bit of context. And I'm also a professional engineer, structural design, and I'm a renovation contractor. And we used to run a bed and breakfast, Bed of Roses B&B in the East Shore. But when you ran the 3 businesses and then I got elected, I thought, something's got to go. And as wonderful as being a B&B host is, it doesn't make money. So I wasn't going to give up engineering.
All right, so I'm Corrine Morey. I'm in Area E. I was a nurse with Interior Health. I was terminated due to not being vaccinated. As a result, for the last 2 years, I've been involved in legal challenges with our union, which has involved doing more investigations of their financial statements with KPMG, who is their accountant, qualified opinions, and using a fraud an analyst to go through those statements. So I've had some experience as a small business owner, and the issue with the union to start seeing the big picture of things that are going on provincially. Then as a result of going through that process, we have been able to force now the union into arbitration. We are now, as you know, because of things that have gone on in the province in the last couple of years, many of us are aware of what I term oppression. And so we are paying more attention, and so it was kind of a natural segue for me to start looking at the financials with the regional district, and have been able to partner up with very educated people that have also contributed to some of the questions that have arisen. So I did arrange this meeting with Cheryl and Stuart, and did receive permission for it to be open to the public and that we are recording. And that given the fact that there has been problems before where we have been accused of being angry mobs, we are forced into having to make sure that all of our interactions are recorded. So everybody's aware, this meeting is being recorded and it will be available to whoever needs to hear some of these questions.
I'm Karen, and I'm also from Area E, and I have concerns about provincial guidelines coming down, and I just feel it's time to get involved on local government levels to get a grip of where we're at with that, and so I'm supporting things like this.
And I'm Maggie Tyner, and I live in Area H. And I too am concerned about the local government and the powers that are being bestowed upon the local government to enforce certain things that are not in consultation with the general public, in full disclosure.
Jim Williams, I'm from Brewer, Area E. I got involved with the RDCK Ratepayers Association. I founded the RDCK Ratepayers Association. So I've been watching the board meetings and the operations at RDC, mainly because my neighbors complain constantly about how overbloated, etc., that the RDCK is and how intrusive. As nice as they are, there's a tribute to you, Stuart, you're very nice people, but the opposite end of it is we're feeling embattled. We're feeling pulled up in our little thing, and it's constant, whether it's planning or climate change plans or something. It's the omnipotent RDCK is to the rescue in everything, every aspect of our lives. So that's why I'm here. I'm interested in how much all this stuff costs us and where it's going. Thanks.
I'm Ellen Chambers from Area H. I'm a retired college professor, and I am very concerned about what's happening in my area. My taxes have been increased. They have doubled since I've moved here, and it's overwhelming for retired people to think about not being able to keep your home over things like that. There are many people that are barely making it in Area H, and we need to look at that, how we make life possible for people that are barely getting by right now.
My name's Shirley. Right now I'm living in Area I. I've been here for almost a year now. I just moved from Ottawa. I sold my 49-year-old business and farm and decided to come somewhere a little nicer than Ottawa. And I'm very concerned about everything that's happening, and I'm just here to learn more and to finally put faces to names of people that I've just heard about. Thank you.
Carol Siegel. Came to the Kootenays in 2016. I live in an 11-acre off-grid plot, and I was a councillor in Selma until last year. I elected not to be nominated again for various reasons, but I had my first brush with what was then the Eco Society, and managed to convince Selma not to sign up to 100% renewable, which they were proposing at the time, and presented information to the council at that time. I was surprised and concerned when I heard about the climate action plan to the RDCK. I live in Area G, and immediately joined onto the group who feel that, well, first of all, we weren't consulted, and I'm aware of the Local Government Act, which requires that plans like this should initially, before they are implemented, go through a consultation phase with the citizens, number one. I think A on the list of who must be consulted is the citizens. And so I feel very strongly that the horse is bolted, now we're closing the gates, which unfortunately is a situation where it affects the livelihoods of all of us who live in somebody quoted, I think we're the size of Belgium, typically, the RDCK, yet we don't have transit, and we don't have all the infrastructure which goes with a big country, basically. And yet, as a rural area, I think we need to be treated differently. So that's why I'm here.
My name is Geneviève Lavage. I moved from Quebec in '95. Was a GIS analyst. Actually, I used to work for the regional district as the GIS administrator. And I am also very concerned as to what the government has been implying on people. And I'm glad you brought censorship, because I'm also here for, making sure that everybody's heard. And I experienced censorship directly from Stuart, questioning the COVID weekly report that was full of misinformation that was distributed through the employees. And I was threatened that if I were to go to HR and discuss any of that, some decisions that they didn't want to make were going to be made. And that was directly coming from Stuart, because my email was only to him. So I've been very concerned from the very get-go as to what the government is trying to do, and how it's censoring anybody who's asking questions along the way. So I am here to not be silenced anymore as an employee, and I am now a citizen, and I'm here and I'm asking questions, expecting answers.
What area are you
Area I.
Hi, I'm Ben Selensky. I'm a retired accountant. I moved back to the Kootenays 4 years ago. I guess ever since COVID's came into place and what's happening now, it seems like the government is coming in and trying to put their agenda on everybody. And I think it's been totally mismanaged. So now that's why I'm trying to get involved with the group here and find out what's more going on and questioning everything.
Sorry, what area are you
I'm from Blewett,
from?
Area E.
I'm Corrine Williamson. I'm a wife, a mom, and a grandmom, and I am, we're called to be good stewards of our finances, and I'm here to find out what's happening with the RDCK finances.
Area E? Okay.
Oh, sorry, thank you.
My name's Paul Ignasic, Area A, Sirdar. I started the Creston Freedom Group. A lot of people might turn their nose up at that in the RDCK, but I can assure you there's a lot of us out there, pretty much every town in Canada, I might add. I'm here as an observer today. I don't really know much about the RDCK finances, but my trust has been severely shaken in my municipal government for a variety of reasons, which Gary Jackman is familiar with, and I've filled him in on that to some degree, without being too long and boring. Looks like you go on for quite a while. Pretty much agreed with what everybody said here, and yeah, I'm here as an observer.
Okay. Everyone, thanks for coming. My name's Stuart Warren. Oh, did we?
Yeah, I'm sorry I came late. My name's Bonnie Atkinson. I'm a concerned citizen, and I think a lot of government areas are overreaching, and I just want to learn as much as I can and contribute whatever I might be able to.
What area are you from, Bonnie?
Well, I live in Nelson. I always forget the city.
Okay.
Floor is yours.
And my name's Stuart Horn. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer with the Regional District. I've been with the RD since 2013. CFO for about 8 of those years. CAO for 9 of those years. So I was in a dual role for a number of years throughout that time period. And thank you all for coming. Hopefully we can help answer some of the questions you've got today.
Do me a favor, Jim. In my briefcase, there's a book with a bunch of cards in it. I don't have enough paper.
Here.
Yeah, no, but I want to keep it.
She wants to keep it in her
It's a
book.
black book with a bunch of
Just pass her the whole bag.
That's probably a really good idea. I'm not very good with ladies' purse.
You're supposed to hold it like a football.
Thank
No,
you.
you don't stand there.
That's right.
What are you thinking?
Did you want to start? You said you had an intro.
No, I did it. We did the
Oh,
intro.
okay.
Good. The floor is
Great.
yours.
So I've been through the document. I've got a number of,
I
okay.
had something I wanted to say
Fire
first,
away.
if that's okay, sorry.
I'm mindful of the time.
I'm mindful of the time also, but I just want to say that I understand that there is resident concerns and questions here. And I want to thank CAO Horn for setting up this meeting, and at my request, and thank Corrine for providing a written list of questions to help us be organized. I also want to say that we're here in a spirit of cooperation today, that our goal
is that the residents and myself and whoever can ask questions of CAO Horn to gain a better understanding of the RDCK finances, statements, plans. I'm working hard and also trying to understand the functions and finances of the RDCK. It's complicated, and I'm new. My knowledge at this time is somewhat limited, so I'm looking forward to learning a lot here today. So all I'm going to ask from all of you is that we all listen, like fully listen with an open mind to the information presented, that we don't interrupt each other, talk over each other. If you've got a burning question or a response, like write it down and just let who's ever talking finish so that we can just ask questions in an orderly manner. If I need to hold a speakers list, or Gary's really great at holding meetings, so he'll help. And thank you very much.
And I would just like to say, I'd really like Stuart to have the full amount of time. So, in fact, it's probably better that we just formulate our questions after, and then we can submit them back for him to review later. But for now, he has the floor, if that's okay with everyone. Good.
Okay. I've been through this document. I've more or less got a story that I can tell walking through it in terms of the answers. Any documentation that you'd like to have, you're more than welcome to put in a Freedom of Information request. The reason we have the FOI process is because through the Ombudsperson's office, there is a limit to the amount of time that local government are expected to look at specific projects, and that could be anything. That could be something where someone's looking at buying 10 properties and they want all the building inspection files since the property's inception. As soon as we get past a certain amount of time gathering that information, we actually, under the FOI Act, have to charge for that time. So 3 hours of time is free, and then beyond that, it's a charge, and we prepare a quote based on the request that comes in. So I'm hoping that this discussion will help filter out some of the requests that you may or may not want to have, because the documentation requested in here is significant and would take a long time to put together. So hopefully some answers can help say, nope, we definitely want to see something like that, or nope, this answer's fine, or I can point to where you can find it on our website in certain circumstances, whether it's on an agenda, whether it's through financial statements or the budget process or anything like that. The one question I've got off the bat is how many people have been to one of our public budget meetings? Okay. So we've got a few of you who have been through that process. So that means there's probably varying degrees of understanding in terms of what the regional district does. I don't want to go into too much detail on that because I could talk for an hour on the regional district setup, how we operate, how we're legislated, what we're responsible for from a provincial perspective, and what is the choice of the public in terms of what we do as a regional district. If there's any clarifying questions that you've got because you're not understanding what I'm saying, please ask those questions as we go. If it's something where it's a question, as Corinne mentioned, that could be asked after, then probably for the benefit of time, that question gets asked after and we can deal with that afterwards, okay? So we have 183 services. And the way I like to describe our services is every single one is a puzzle piece. And that puzzle piece determines who pays for that service from a taxation perspective. We have very few services that cover the entire regional district. The only one that actually covers the entire regional district in one service is our general administration service. So that's the service that covers our overhead costs. That's administration, that's HR, that's finance, that's IT, and it's our director costs. And that service, which is the first one that's identified at the top here with questions, that service gets its revenue from two sources. One, taxation, and the second one is we actually allocate that time out to the services that use it. For example, we have a significant amount of employees in our recreation department. So that recreation department, those services, would pay for more HR time than a service with fewer employees. So we try to allocate the time out based on cost drivers, whether it's employees, whether it's the number of AP transactions that a service has, revenue for AR transactions. We try to be very specific.
Accounts payable, watch acronyms.
Sorry, accounts payable, yeah. I will get into acronyms, so if there is something that I say in an acronym and you don't understand it, please just flag me and I'll try to get that down. So again, that's the only service that covers the entire regional district. We have services where everybody receives the service, waste management, but it's in 3 different services. So we have our East Resource Recovery Service for waste management. That's Area A, Area B, Area C, and the town of Creston. We then have Central, which goes up from the South Area G and Selmo, comes through Nelson, Area E and F, and then goes up and covers Caslow in Area D. And then we have our west subregion. So that's H, I, J, K, and then all the villages through the valley, along with Castlegar and the cusp. So although the service is provided to everybody in the regional district, we actually have different service buckets. So somebody in the East Resource Recovery Service might pay a different rate on their taxes than someone in Central and someone in West. And that's really service driven. How many recycling depots do you have? How many transfer stations do you have? Do you have a landfill that's operating in the area? We have 3 landfills right now that are in operation. One's in Creston, one's in the Cusp, and one's in Udishenya. So those services, although they're providing something very similar, are cut up with those puzzle pieces. And that goes for the rest of our services across the RD. So those puzzle pieces, when you're looking at the budget, that's really important to understand that although we might have 183 services, there's certain ones that affect some residents, and then there are services that affect other residents, and so on and so forth, depending on where you live, right? And those services, the more operational they are, the higher the cost they are for us. So when we're looking at the fact that we operate 3 major recreation centers, that's a big cost for us as a regional district. We're one of the few regional districts that has an operation of that size. Most recreation centers are either contracted out or they're run by the municipalities in the area. A good example is the city of Trail. So they operate their rec center there, and the regional district actually pays a contribution through taxation, so the rural residents support it in some way. But that center is operated by the city of Trail, so it's not sitting on the regional district of Kootenay boundary tax bill. Whereas if you're in the regional district here and you live near Nelson, so Nelson ENF shares a service for the rec complex here, and only part of area E rather. In the Creston area, it's part of area A, B, C, and Creston that contribute to that service. And then we have our Castlegar rec service, which is I, J, and the city of Castlegar. So if you live in one of those areas that contributes to a rec center, you actually see a very different tax bill than somebody who doesn't. Because recreation and fire protection are our most expensive services when it comes to taxation. So if you live in an area that does not have a rec service and does not have fire protection, you'll see your regional district tax bill is significantly lower than someone who's in a fire protection area or has recreation service. So a good example is Area K. Area K is one of our least operational rural areas. It does not have a recreation center. It does not have any fire protection outside of a contract with the village of Nakas. And it only has operations related to resource recovery, so waste management. But then you get down into Area F, for example, you've got resource recovery, you've got a major rec center, you've got wall-to-wall fire protection, so regardless of where you are, you're paying that fire protection, you'll see a big difference in your tax rate.
Is it worth highlighting? We do not have to provide recreation. It's at the request of majority. We don't have to provide fire protection. If there's volunteers or capacity, it's at the request of the residents. We do have to provide waste management. So all these services have a different context. If you guys had 50 plus 1 say to vote, you don't want to do the rec center in Nelson anymore, city can take it, and they say yes, that could happen. Won't happen, but it's a voluntary service, and that's important to understand.
Yeah,
They're only there because people
Why do you say it
want
won't happen?
Oh, it's not going to happen in my lifetime, I should say. I'm in my mid-60s. I truly believe that untangling some of our services would be so complex it will take a decade to 2 decades or more. But they're not, the point is, they're not all mandatory services. Most of them are people say, hey, do this, and here's our vote, do it.
Yeah. The only services that we're mandated to provide are emergency management, building inspection once it's set up. We're not mandated to provide building inspection, but once you start a building inspection service, which we have, you can't get rid of it. The province will not allow you to get rid of it. There are some regional districts that have no building inspection in some other rural areas, but as soon as they started it up, then you're locked into providing it from the provincial perspective. So emergency management, building inspection, waste management is a huge one. That's one that's been delegated to regional districts, and we manage the transfer stations and landfills. Big cost there. Mandated services beyond that.
It's not a whole lot.
Not a whole lot. Everything else we have to go through a public process for.
Sorry, just recap: emergency services, building inspection, and waste management. Waste management.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But there's others similar to building inspection. If you get into a water system, the province has rejected the concept of getting out of that water system. They say, nope, you're stuck with it. So there's similar scenarios.
And they're creeping that way on fire protection as well.
And zoning planning is the same.
Zoning and planning. Zoning and planning is it's not a mandated service from the perspective of you have to provide it. But I do think that it would be difficult to rescind an OCP or zoning bylaws completely. There'd be amendments that you could make, obviously, that would change them, that would require a public process. But rescinding them, I think, might be difficult for the province. I've never encountered it, so I haven't asked the question. But I'd be surprised if they'd say, yeah, that's fine, go ahead and just get rid of it.
And part of corporate admin, we must provide
Which one are
ability
we
to
at?
vote.
1025. Transit's not mandatory. Transit's an interesting one because of the partnerships that we do have. So our transit services are in partnership with BC Transit and Interior Health. BC Transit pays 60%, 55% of the bill, and then the local government portion is the remaining balance. So it's a very good partnership from a transit perspective.
Why is Interior Health involved?
Interior Health pays for their health connections. So if they have a health connection bus that's going, or a health connection bus, we don't have any of us around here, that's going somewhere, they contribute to the service to pay for that support. Yeah. So that's kind of the Coles notes. When I get talking about that stuff, I kind of lose the forest for the trees. So hopefully I've covered enough in terms of the 30,000-foot view of the RD before I get into some of the specifics here.
Clarification on something you said back on the general admin. You said the money came from a couple of sources. You said taxation and there was nothing else mentioned.
The service itself gets its revenue from two sources. I guess you could say all the revenue eventually comes from taxation in some way, but we tax directly for the service, and then there's a portion that gets essentially cost recovered from the services that are using our internal support services. Okay. So if you have employees, you're using HR, you're using payroll. If you pay bills, you're using our accounts payable department. And we have cost drivers that we allocate that out based on the previous year's averages. So
it's almost double dipping, because there's a taxation for general administration, then we're being taxed for different services, and they're taking a second percentage from that service to pay for general administration?
No. The tax in general administration is not a double taxation. So it's to cover a portion of costs that we don't allocate out. So the way we do it is that all of the director costs stay in general admin, and they're taxed in general admin. Then we have 25% of our internal support costs. If you're going to open the doors, you're going to have a finance department, an HR department, an IT department. You've got to have something to start up. So we leave 25% of those costs in general admin, and they're taxed for in general admin. Everything else is recovered from another service. So it's not double. We don't take the director's costs, allocate it out, recruit taxes for that, and tax in general admin. It's one or the other. And so there's three services that are highlighted here. I'll go through those. First one is general administration. There was questions around 4 account line items. Benefits is something that is linked directly to salary. So when I talk about salary increases, really the benefit increases fall out of that. All of our benefits, most of our benefits rather, are based on salary. So you've got your WorkSafe, you've got your pension, you've got CPP, EI, all those deductions that are coming out, those are all in that benefit line item. The big one here...
Do you mind if we just follow through?
Sure.
That would make it easier for us.
Yep. So the first question was on requisitions. Requisitions, there's a big increase from 2022 to 2027 that's proposed in the current financial plan.
What page are you on?
First one.
First line. First line. Requisitions.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's forecasted to go from 1.5 million to just under 3 million in 2027. The main reason for that is we're running a surplus in general admin. So right now, general admin is benefiting from the fact that we've got a surplus that's rolling forward each year and keeping taxation lower. Basically what it means is that the service to operate it costs more than what we're currently recovering in taxes and internal cost recoveries. So that surplus is being smoothed out, and by 2027 that surplus is gone. So the taxation that's needed to operate the service is actually closer to 3 million. It's not the 1.6 that we're currently taxing. I will say that over the years, we try to forecast what those requisitions are going to be in the 5-year plan. And I'd say for a number of our services, we are very close to being quite accurate on that 5-year trajectory, because a lot of the costs are quite predictable and we're able to forecast what that 5-year plan is. I'd say with the surplus in general admin, we don't always have a good idea of how much surplus is going to get used each year. So the 5-year forecast for general admin, I'd say of all of our services, is the one that changes from year to year a little bit more than other services. So when I look at a fire service, we really try to predict what expenses we're going to have, what equipment we're going to buy, what the turnout gear is going to look like, what hoses we're going to need, trucks, etc. When it comes to general admin, there are things that come into it that cause us to be a little bit off. The budget also, every year our cost recovery formula is recalculated based on what our recoveries are from the services. We can't do that on a forecasted basis because it's based on actuals. So we have to wait and see what those actuals look like to see what the cost recoveries are. So this is a very fluctuating number, but the main reason for that large increase over the 5-year plan is the absorption of the surplus into the service.
And the source of the surplus in this round, I've seen this twice in my tenure, was more during COVID. People just walked away. We weren't paying a lot of people. They left. They said they're going back to family in Ontario. They're going back to the prairies. They're out of here.
You are aware that year that all your expenses went up, right?
So I'm aware of the entire tract for 18 years.
Okay.
But we had a hole in operations to dig out of after COVID. But it was weird because in some places we had ongoing costs that we couldn't avoid. We still had to look after certain buildings. The roof still got older, everything else still, we weren't running the pumps and everything Santa Rec Center, but everything's aging, less wear and tear. But on the other hand, we had staff who also walked away. So some costs were ongoing and some costs bottomed out. And we're coming out of that hollow. And so if you took 2023, which was a more stable budget, this year's budget, and reran your numbers, you get a big difference. You'd see 15% over 4 years, which is lower than the current CPI forecast. So, and the prior general admin roller coaster, that was a whole different thing. I'll have a cup of coffee with you sometime and talk about that. That's part of why I'm in local government. But all of the numbers you've tagged that are coming out of COVID are tainted by that massive shift we had operationally and the numbers of staff who walked away. And we're still not up to full staff in some departments. But that's life. So we carry on.
The salary line item increase, 38.61%, is highlighted there. The main reason for that increase is that in the 2023 budget process, there were a couple of positions approved by the board that go directly into general admin. Now, that doesn't mean they're taxed in general admin. They could be recovered from some of the other services depending on what they are. But we had an HR advisor, an IT position, and a payroll position that are in there. So that would have been a bump in 2023. And then beyond that, it would have been inflationary increases that we apply, because we do have our agreement with our staff association regarding what our annual increases are. It's based on an agreed upon calculation, and we kind of use what the current year's result of that calculation is, and we're trying to forecast out. But obviously, anybody watching inflation has noticed that it really hasn't gone down at all the way we expected during this year.
Or why wouldn't staff just not take an increase? You know, like, why do they need to take an increase? Nobody else gets an increase. Why would you guys?
We provide an increase to our staff because the cost of living goes up. And
I realize that, but what I'm asking is why? You know, they have a salary that's a fairly decent salary compared to a lot of people like myself who live on a little over $1,000 a month, and you guys want a wage increase. I don't get a pension increase by maybe $5, $6. That doesn't cover the cost of living. So maybe you guys should take a salary freeze.
Well, we want to be an employer of choice, and we want to retain our quality staff, and part of that is increases.
Is that a political decision, or is that a staff decision? The rise in
I think it's pretty standard that government employees get consistent increases,
but just
consistent
somebody
benefits.
initiates it, don't they? Who initiates it?
It's kind of built into their contracts and the unions that are involved. It's all part of the negotiation thing. So really, our best solution is to just reduce numbers of staff.
Yeah.
So we'll just simplify it that way. But go ahead.
Benefits, as I mentioned, it's linked to salary. The percentage increase is pretty much on par with salary for that reason. The contract item is highlighted here. That's related to our transition to Microsoft 365. And really the major increase, if you look at it through the annual budgets, is 2020 from 2022 to 2023. There's a big bump, and then beyond that, it would just be minor increases. But $156,000 increase is shown there. I think 130 of that is the 2023 increase related to Microsoft 365.
Is this an annual licensing fee, or what does it pay for? Actually?
Yeah, it's an annual contract fee for Microsoft 365, which we're more or less being forced to move into. By Microsoft.
Okay.
They're forcing us to move onto their cloud system.
Okay.
And stopping support for our current Microsoft system, which is still 2016. We've been working off that.
That's quite common in business, because Microsoft wants to control the software.
Yeah.
So they're generating it, so every business is going to be faced with that. You can't buy the product, you have to license it out every year.
So when you say you're forced, I mean, what would happen, just hypothetically, if you just said, well, no, we don't want that program because we don't want to make that expenditure. They would just cut you off Microsoft?
Yeah, we'd have no email system. We'd
basically unplugged.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Rural administration is a second service here, so S101, there's 3 questions there: requisition, salaries, and benefits.
Which are you in?
First page, front page.
Okay.
We're looking at all the numbers.
Okay.
I'll try to move quickly through this one. The reason for the increases here is all based on one, and it's really about the comparative number that's being used. If 2023 was being used at the starting point, you'd see the numbers being a lot less on an overall basis. There's a bylaw officer that was hired, that is going to be hired in 2023 to support our parks and our bylaw team, and that increases in 2023. So that one position has been added in 2023, and then it carries forward with our annual increases going forward on that. So really, that's the main reason for that overall increase.
Is that for all the little regional parks?
Yes, all of our regional
why
parks.
do you need one?
Because we've had problems with our parks enforcement in terms of people camping there, squatting, garbage, a lot of problems with our park services. Building inspection. Building inspection, again, revenue comes from 2 sources: user fees and taxation. And the board tries to balance that roughly 50-50 until this year. There's been a review that started, it's gone to the board a few times with reports around increasing our user fee structure so that more of the revenue for our building inspection comes from those that are submitting building permit applications and less from taxation. That study has not yet been incorporated into this 5-year financial plan. So right now we're keeping on that same trajectory that we were before with our lower user fees, and that's why these numbers, especially with the requisition, have the 56% increase over the 5 years, or it's actually 6 years with these numbers here. And I anticipate that when we do our 2024 financial plan, that we'll see more of a balance between user fees. Taxation will drop because we'll have a higher budget for our user fee revenue. Salaries and benefits, again, they're linked here. The salary number, we did have a new position put in for 2023. Actually, we had 3 new positions put in for 2023 that were approved by the board, subject to them being paid by user fees, not by taxation. So again, that hasn't been incorporated in this 5-year plan regarding those user fees. So we've got a development technician in Creston, we've got a plan checker in Creston, and we've got a plan checker in Nelson that were approved as part of the 2023 budget. Again, to be paid from a source other than taxation.
And what are these plans and development?
So they are basically the front end of our building permit process. So some of the issues we've been having in our building inspection department are delays in getting permits issued. And the big problem has been that upfront communication with the resident, looking at the plans at the front end to make sure that everything's there. And that process had been delayed because of lack of staff. So we've been trying to put more staff at the front desk to be able to help residents when they come forward with their applications, and then that helps the permit get issued earlier. Employee numbers. One correction I want to make here is that in 2017, our employee numbers, full-time and part-time, were 370 staff. In 2023, we've been averaging on payroll 398 staff for every payroll period. So it's 370 to 398, not 225 to 522. That does not include are 220 volunteer firefighters. So in total, with our volunteer firefighters, or paid on call firefighters rather, we're at 618 in 2023.
Now, why did they start getting paid on call?
I'm sorry?
Why did they start getting paid for doing on call?
Because recruitment and retention for firefighters is extremely difficult. And we had to start paying them for their time.
So I got these numbers through Freedom of Information through your staff. So why is there such a difference from what they reported to what you're saying?
I'd be curious to see the source of that information, because there's no way we were at 225 in 2017. We would need 225 staff just to operate our recreation facilities alone, and that wouldn't include anything else. So I don't know where those numbers might have come from. But the 370 and 398 are from HR and payroll.
And Corinne, you said you got the numbers from where? Freedom of Information from?
Yeah, I believe it was Angela.
Angela being?
I have the email.
Who's Angela?
Angela Lund. Is she
So
the
you
one
got
that
it-
does the
you got it
Freedom of
in-house?
Information? In-house, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about contractors?
Contractors are on top of that.
Plus contractors,
Yeah, that doesn't include our contract. We contract a number of our landfill operations out, and that wouldn't include those staff members.
I believe that is a question that's coming up. So do you have the contracting numbers from 2017 to 2022?
No, I don't have numbers of contractors. I don't have that number handy.
Okay, so we'll need that.
For example, Alex was involved with the climate action plan.
He's a contractor.
He's a contractor, right? So are there many other?
No, Alex would be a part-time staff member.
He says he's a contractor.
No, he qualifies himself as a contractor.
Well, that's fine. However he qualifies himself is fine, but we pay him through payroll, and he would be in that 398.
So this is where there's some confusion, because we're having numbers of staff who are considered staff. We also are seeing a huge number in the financial statements of increased contractors. There's no clear definition of what makes a staff versus a contractor. People that you're saying are staff are identifying themselves as contractors. So we're going to have to somehow come up with some very clear numbers on exactly how many staff, how many contractors, seeing that comparison through the years, and then what these contractors are actually doing and why they would be functioning as a contractor versus a staff. Does that make sense?
It does. However, the reason that Alex is saying he's a contractor is because he's got a part-time contract. He's a term employee. So we brought him in for the summer. I think he's here till the fall perhaps. But we don't have, nobody in this building, for example, is a contractor from the regional district's perspective. We don't contract any individuals other than cleaners at fire halls or something like that. But there's no staff member in this building that would be a contractor.
So your financial statements are not reflecting that.
The contract number in the financial statements are contracts that we have with companies to operate various things. So that would be either project-based or it would be operational-based. So we've got Green for Life that operates all of our recycling. We've got Alpine that operates our transfer station our Nakusp landfill. We've got Score Construction, I think, still does our Creston landfill. So those are what's in the contract numbers. They're not contractors as individuals. They're contracts that we have with companies to do work for us.
I understand that,
Okay.
but your financial statements are not reflecting that information with clarity, or with the information is not jiving. Your numbers are not matching. Your information from your staff is not matching. So I'm just saying that is become a vortex of chaos, and that section needs to be cleaned up a bit.
So that's a comment for the Public Standards Accounting Board, because we follow PSAB to prepare our financial statements and they're audited. So if you want more detail in there, that's not on us as a regional district to do that, because that's a question that you can ask and get the detail, and we can provide you with the contracts, all of which, if they're over $75,000, have to be approved by the board. But again, it's not individuals. I would say the vast majority of individuals are on our payroll. They're not through contracts.
So does that mean current source deductions are being made from these people that are on payroll, or are they making them themselves?
No, they be made through payroll.
That includes income tax, EI, CPP.
So this
Oh,
guy
technically they're employees, okay.
so this guy that does it over the summer that you mentioned earlier, when he's over the summer, and if he's supposed to be contracting over the summer, is he on payroll or is he paying as a contractor?
He's on payroll.
So then he.
But every term employee, I was a term employee on airport construction for a few years. When you're a term employee, you essentially sign a contract that's saying at the end of my 6-month term, I have no right to severance or anything else. Okay. So that's a contract. I'm done at 6 months. Happily, they renewed me a few times. Actually, I ended up continuing full time. But it's a contract that in that young man's mind is, yeah, he's agreed in writing, he's done. So it's a whole different. So we can ask, we can add some definitions in front of statements or something. Our employees include continuing full-time, term employment, or whatever.
That would be helpful, thank you.
I thought it's up to Revenue Canada to decide who's employees and who's contractors in the construction industry.
Well, for their tax reporting, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And for me, you provide their tools to provide close direction, and you set their hours of work. Any people come onto my sites that do that, they're my employee. They come onto my sites, they're on their own on those areas, they're a contractor or subcontractor.
If you're,
That's a whole
if
other
you're
thing.
submitting employee deductions on their behalf, then you're employee.
So when the contractors submit, their, say their quote for services, are they going man hours, saying to determine what the rate is going to be? Because they may not have the actual numbers of the employees, but are they working on man hours that could substantiate how much to pay them, that you're paying a reasonable charge?
It would depend on the contract that's being sourced. So, for example, if we're looking at the contract to manage the landfill, that's probably on man hours because we'd have opening hours, there'd be time for managing the fill and all the requirements under the Environmental Management Act that they have to adhere to, so that would probably be something on man hours. A construction contract would be more on materials, there'd be some time in there obviously, but it would really depend on the scope of the RFP that we're putting out.
Okay. Yes, I just want to, because it's kind of tough to determine exactly how many employees or how many contractors individually I have, but I guess it just depends what they're using as their basis for a charge. So
Right, and that detail, for example, the contractor that runs the Cusp landfill, it doesn't really matter to me how many employees they've got, as long as they're adhering to the contract in terms of performance and costs. So if they need 100 people to do the job, or 50, it doesn't matter to us as an organization as long as they're meeting the specs of the contract, that they're staying within the budget and they're meeting the performance standards. So I wouldn't even know how many people are under contract for operating that landfill.
Okay. With these large contractors, how often are you renewing the contracts? Is it annually or every 3 years?
Normally it's every 5.
Every 5 years.
Yeah. Okay. Normally it's every 5. To answer some of the questions that are here, which departments require contractors, I'd say the only department where we require ongoing contracting is resource recovery. There's other contractors that we do have, but I wouldn't say they're required on an ongoing basis. Resource recovery is the one where we use contractors for our operations the most. Renewed every 5 years. Wire administrative contractors under a contract first employee. Again, I think this is a terminology thing in terms of how the staff member might see themselves in terms of how they're brought on, but they're paid through payroll. We don't have any administrative staff that I would term a contractor that would show up in that line on the financial statements. They'd be in salaries at the top. Do contractors have employer paid contributions to the municipal pension plan? No. The pension plan, you have to be an employee for, you have to have a term for longer than a year before benefits are even a consideration for us. And pension plan contributions don't start until after the 6-month mark. Most people opt out when they know they're only going to be here for a year, because if you contribute to the pension plan and then you leave, unless you go to an employer who has the pension plan, you can't transfer it anyway. So you're stuck doing something different with those funds. But in terms of contractors, the definition of contractors with respect to our financial statements, nobody has pension plan. For example, the people working on the Cusp landfill do not have participation in the municipal pension plan.
So big one, why did it go up so high, the cost?
The 2022 contractor number is directly related to a couple of other questions that you've got throughout the document. That is related to the contract that we've got for integrated sustainability consultants, and they're our contractor at HB Mine. So they're doing our reclamation project at HB Mine, and that is a $4 million plus project. So that would have been a big part of that increase over the through 2022.
Have we ever got any recovery from tech in that regard? Has the legal process worked itself out?
Can't comment on legal matters. Sorry.
Okay.
Do you forecast that this cost will be shared by other parties besides us?
Can't comment on that right now.
You can give, so then we have to assume no.
I can't say no. I won't say no to that question, but I
Okay.
can't comment any further than that.
Okay, thank you. Are we talking changes within 5 years?
I hope so. So the contract number in this 2017, 2021, 2022 at the top here, again, I mentioned it's directly related to HB and then also our composting facilities that are being built for the central subregion, which is just outside Selmo at our old landfill there, and then in the east subregion at our Creston landfill as well.
Who's the contractor, please? Is it the same contractor for both?
Nope. Border Holdings is doing our compost facilities.
For both sites, or?
Yes, they're involved in both sites.
Border Holdings?
Border, B-O-R-D-E-R.
That's Inc., I'm assuming? Inc. or whatever, it doesn't matter. Okay. Where are they at?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay.
So the question here of number 2 talks about approval of the financial plan, and that really, like the board approves the financial plan every year. It's approved by bylaw, and staff provides the documentation to the board. It goes through usually two board budget meetings, one in January, one in February, and then our public consultation involves anywhere between 9 and 11 meetings throughout the regional district, because we like to do it by sub-region. We like to make sure that we're going and talking to the residents about what matters to them. There's no point in going to Creston and talking about what's happening at the Castlegar Rec Center. There might be a couple of people that are interested, but they're more interested in what's impacting them on their tax bill. So we do sub-regional meetings throughout February through to March, and then the board considers the bylaw for adoption at the March board meeting.
The bigger question would be why, if you are being able to collect so much more money and revenue based on assessments and development, why there has not been the decision to decrease the rates that are charged.
I would argue that a lot of our rates are decreased on a rate per thousand basis, and the reason is because the assessments have increased. So we don't need as much per thousand to raise the funds that we need to operate at the RD. So the assessments don't directly result in tax increases. We budget based on what we need to operate a service.
I understand that. The question is more, you have significantly more money to work with, yet our taxes are increasing at rates that are unmanageable.
That's right.
So, why? Why, if you are being able to collect this much money, why we're not seeing our tax rates go down instead of up?
That is your taxes. That money is your taxes.
I don't think you're hearing my question.
Are you talking about the rate per thousand?
I'm talking about 5 years ago, you were collecting just under 27 million.
Mm-hmm.
Last year, you collected 36 million. This is how much money is in your account to do operations with, that is collected through taxation. Mm-hmm. This would indicate to me that in 5 years, you have a massive amount of influx into your accounts, and it's all being spent, yet we're not really seeing any kind of benefit in our service, and we're being taxed more. So why aren't we able to have you guys balance your expenses in a way that instead of every dollar that comes in, you blow it on something, control yourself, go, okay, if we can figure out a way how to operate things here on a $30 million budget for the next 5 years, That means we actually get a break from having to pay all these costs. This is what we are responding with, in that there is no control. You're finding ways to spend money because you have it, and we're saying, instead of you blowing money on parking lots or whatever you're doing, paving parking lots or whatever other things you want to spend it on, you need to start showing some restraint.
That's the board issue.
Yeah, and
Stewart and staff have
Exactly.
no money. They have no money to spend until guys like me,
And I've
by
been
majority
seeing
vote,
that every
approve the
time
board.
there is a vote for spending money, there's
Never
never
mind.
any discussion. It's just, okay, which is why I'm going to ask formally
Not the
again.
case for me ever personally over 15 years. You've never seen me not discuss and challenge items in a budget meeting.
Okay.
And maybe some people think I talk too much at budget meetings, but that's the board's decision to tell staff to put that number
That
to
is correct.
the assessment authority
We
to
know
take
that.
that money out of their pocket. And it's nothing to do, Stewart's staff are told to give us projections and what it'll take to deliver service that we hear requests for or that we see requirements for through legislative changes or whatever. It's our decision as the money. It's not something to ask Stewart. He's told, put this to the government or to the assessment authority and take this money.
The few conversations I've had with some of your directors, there are some of them that do not have a very educated understanding of financial statements.
Some of us are there to help them at any time they ask, or staff.
That's why we're here.
I'm here to help your constituent. Have a cup of coffee or answer the questions.
I'd like to also just add to that, and I'll support those. You know, I've been only 2 as an alternate director, and 4 years I was on council, and yes, you're one of the few directors who I've seen ever stand up. However, I have heard too many people tell me as directors that we don't have time to read a 600-page agenda, and therefore the reports are generated by staff to justify these costs. And so I'm coming back to CA Hall to say it's staff that are asking for this money, which goes back to what Corinne was saying. You know, the asks should be seriously considered before they get put to the directors, because sometimes these asks, I think, are not necessarily essential asks, and yet they put together in a way that we need this, and the recommendation is approve. Well, there should be another recommendation, which maybe we could postpone this, or maybe we could go to an alternate solution. But there isn't that being done. And I'll just quote the one example of a Selma pool, which didn't happen this year for a number of reasons. Yet the approval was given to go ahead and do this project without any consideration that by doing it in the middle of summer would essentially end up with no pool at all. So costs were spent, or are being spent, it's still not finished. The point is that I think, it's all very well to play this as, the good cop, bad cop, but the point is staff are generating the requests, and I think the requests are to spend money that's available, which is not necessarily the way it should be. That's a feeling I get from the outside.
The requests are never to spend money that's available. We don't just tax and say we're going to tax an extra $3 million and put that away just in case we need it. We'll go to the board to ask to use it later. We don't tax for anything that's not approved through the budget. And that's what we do. We take a look at every single service and what's required to run the service, and that's what the board ends up considering for adoption. It's not, well, we'll just thumb it and say we need $500,000 to run this service this year, and oh look, we've got 120 left over. We don't do it that way. Everything has a reason for it. Every single report that we bring forward has options. It's not approve or nothing. There's usually 3 options, especially when it comes to a staff member. The 3 options for a staff member are approve for hire, delay it, or start with a term position to see what the needs are. And there's a number of positions that we've got where the board said, let's just start slow and say, do we actually need this? Let's do a year, let's do 2 years, and see if we actually need this rather than jumping in to a permanent position. So we always provide the board with options when it comes to that. They can always do nothing.
From an outside perspective, the fact that there was a $75,000 allocation agreed for somebody who was going to oversee the whole climate action thing, before the vote had even occurred in terms of the yea or nay, from our perspective, looks like there's already an agenda to move things through. You're hiring people of which we don't even have a vote that has said that this is what the community wants. And so on these kinds of examples, I hope you can appreciate why we look at this and our antennas are like, okay, this is not making sense. So I'll just give that feedback.
And to bookend your statement, I would say that those actions that are being described by you, on my interpretation, however narrow it is, seems to violate the local act that Farrell mentioned earlier. And that's not being addressed to anyone's satisfaction, certainly not mine.
Sorry, I missed that. What's that point?
What
violates the local government?
The hiring of these consultants and such that you have in this climate action plan.
Yeah.
Okay. We haven't been consulted.
So
the local act, as Farrell's provided some education to me on that regard, it seems to me that the RDCK is violating that act. Because we haven't been consulted. Ostensibly, I've been told that 60% of the climate action plan has already been passed. Where was the consultation?
Yeah.
So I don't want to make this about the climate action plan.
No, neither do I.
I'm just plenty of time to talk about that.
What she's saying, that's all.
The hiring of that staff member was directly related to the increased public consultation that we needed to do around the plan. It's not someone who's coming in and implementing the plan. It's someone who's coming in to support the dialogue circles, the open houses. That open house list is 2/3 of a page. There's a lot of work that's going into this consultation plan. So the board approved moving some of the budget that might have been contemplated down the road through our local government climate action grant that we get from the province. So not local taxation money, but from the provincial grant, and moving that a little bit forward to say, yeah, staff needs more support if this is actually going to get to a point where we can get feedback to the board, and the board can make a decision as to what that feedback entails with respect to the climate action plan.
How much is the provincial grant? Is it an annual stipend, or is it just a lump sum?
It's an annual amount. I want to say it's. Geez, they changed the program. It used to be $82,000 through our what they call the climate action reporting, and now they've changed it to a local government climate action plan grant. I believe last year we got $150,000, but I don't know what that means on an annual basis going forward.
So how are you making public aware of these meetings that you have?
Well, they've been advertised. They're already being advertised, and they don't start till the end of the month. Yeah.
On the 60%, can I just, before we move away, there were 3 major public consultation programs, outreaches, that constitute the vast majority of what's underway. You had transit consultation on this side and on the Crescent Valley side. We had recreation master plan consultations, partially divided between the 3 major rec centers, but also in the rural context. We're talking about trails and hiking and lake access. And we had waste management plan consultation in this round going back 4 to 5 years, starting with organics discussion, which is one of those big contracts you guys are asking about, where we got 2/3 of money from the province. Those 3 massive consultation processes were there for you to go to for the years, and they constitute work that's in stream.
We only know about things because Cheryl started emailing us.
But these are historical.
I've been here 35 years.
Yeah.
Okay. The only communication I've ever received from the regional district is from Cheryl. So I would say your ability to communicate with the residents, we're telling you it's not up to par.
That's right.
So you can defend yourself, or you can just go, okay, we need to come up with better ways.
The process is that verified under the Local Government Act, that as a board we felt we're on the right track to go ahead with the transit changes, which were massive, with the waste management changes, and with the recreation complex and trail and park. All I'm saying is whether or not I think I communicate well is entirely aside. That we had the public process under the Local Government Act, and that's why we can say so much of the shopping list under the climate action plan is underway, because it was under those public processes, not this one. This is for the next group of stuff.
What was the public process of notification?
Yeah.
I can't give you all that off the top of my head, Paul,
Okay.
except that before I was elected, I was aware what's going on, because I was the first Plan Monitoring Advisory Committee member, along with Health Kindrop, on this regional district. And during my elected time, I've been aware of what's going on, and that's because I'm me. So every individual, I take a little personal responsibility for learning about your local government, what's going on and why, or stop me in the parking lot or the shopping center like everybody does and say, what's going on and what's happened to this and that.
Well,
Personal
we prefer to have
responsibility is
these
part of
meetings
this.
here where everybody can hear. And so we're just aware that they feel that they have adequately communicated with us.
No,
We are communicating publicly that we are not feeling that we are getting proper notification.
And I hear that.
Okay, so that's
How
all we
would
need to.
How would I find a record of what the public process of notification was?
I'm not sure, but I have a lot to do today and tomorrow. The next day is your director. So go to Freedom of Information.
Okay.
Because for the tens of thousands of emails and records I have, I don't think, Paul, my best thing to do for you as a constituent is to try and figure that out. Although I probably have it somewhere.
Okay, is there anyone I could ask who may know?
Ask this guy.
You can send me a note.
Send you a note?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just to
I'll do
respond to
that.
that, none of these, as you mentioned, consultation processes refer to the a climate lens.
No, because I was prior.
Right. And unfortunately, this whole issue has boiled up because this particular plan, there was no prior consultation before the directors approved a climate crisis or defined a climate crisis at a particular board meeting.
We didn't. My word was imperative. I said basically it's not an emergency or crisis, but sorry, I'm interrupting.
Correct. Or climate emergency.
Paris said it was an emergency.
And my concern of that is that, and that's where I go back before plans are implemented. Those plans should have been open consultation, and that consultation is starting to happen. But it was because things were cancelled in March, April, or postponed till now. Several individuals took this on themselves, including myself, to try and get community consultation to happen. And I put a target on my back because of that. I know that. But the point is that somehow we had to get this initiative going. And I think, and that's what I think we're mentioning is that, in terms of the Act, this should have all happened before any action really started taking place. Because as we've been mentioned by Dan and Paris, is that actions have already been in progress. 60% was the number quoted, that already things are happening. Mm-hmm. And we're saying, well, wait a minute, I think most people don't actually know what's happening. And that's where the consultation is, I believe, is very important. And it really concerns me that the process that's being developed more and more is sort of wordsmithing this process so that it's not climate. And yet, that is exactly what it is. That's what's driving this. So I hope, that it's the financial issue. We're spending a lot of money on this particular project. And I don't know if everybody in our region, certainly the question that was brought up was, by nobody showing up means that nobody's really interested. That's not an answer. We really need almost a referendum on this matter, and that's what it's getting to, where a poster board type of town hall that's going to be coming up in the next few days isn't really consultation at all. In fact, it's not at all, because not even the word climate has been removed out of the advertisements for these events. So, it really upsets me.
We're getting down we're on number 3, and I'm getting on a climate action rabbit hole.
Yeah.
I want to say I do disagree with your claims under the Local Government Act that we're not following the consultation requirements, because that's a different story that I can get into at another time. Number 3, does each business unit have its own set of accounts? Absolutely. You can FOI this, or the easiest way to do it is to look at our budget documents. They provide the previous year's actuals on the approved budget, so you can see by service what each account line item is. We always provide the prior year. So if you go back to 2017.
Can we get an actual ledger, though, of ins and outs, expenses and debits and credits?
You can ask for it. Yep.
Quarterly reports, get Matt to start sending because it's got the 2 tiers. You go into the
Yeah,
detail
yeah, the
ledger.
transactional stuff, yeah.
Takes me a while to go through the ones that impact Area A, but
Yeah.
they're all available. I get
I
them.
only get the ones for my area.
That's what I get, because I learned the others through my committee that I'm involved with.
Why did the RDCK change accounting auditors in 2022? We had issues with our auditor in 2021 with timing and getting our statements, and we hadn't done an RFP for 5 years. So under our internal policies,
RFP.
request for proposals.
It was
So
time.
every number of years, we go back out to the market and see what we can get. It's also good to change auditors every now and then. Make sure someone new's coming in, taking a look at things. The 2022 financial statements were audited by another auditor who expressed an unqualified opinion on these statements. Why? An unqualified opinion is a good thing.
Yeah.
That's a good thing, right? It means that they don't have any reservations about any material misstatements with respect to the financial statements. So when we see an unqualified audit report, that's a good thing.
Let's.
Yeah, I agree. It's a silly word.
Number 6.
Yes, the whole issue of changing all the categories so we can't do a comparison.
So that's an auditor request, something that actually I've been pushing back a little bit on over a couple of years, because municipal ledgers are a little bit easier to present when you say protective services, because it impacts everybody, right? Everybody in the city of Nelson, for the police budget, that number means something to all of them. When you put waste management as a line item for the regional district, that means something different for you than it does for you, because the services are different, right? Throwing that line item in to say we spent $13 million on resource recovery services, well, we did, but you're in a service that might have spent 4, you're in a service that might have spent 5, and then someone in West or in Area H is in a service that spent the balance. So I don't find them extraordinarily helpful, but the public sector accounting standards require that we present the information that way. So that's why they changed in 2022, was a request from the auditor.
So are we going to be able to get a comparison in the previous listings so that we can actually see? Because the categories make it so it's impossible to be able to track what has been going on in that same expense from years past into now things shifting. We need a couple of years of transition where we have both available so that we can be able to ensure that things are staying within the realm that they should.
So for that one, when you submit the FOI request, it would be helpful to show what schedule you're referring to in terms of what you'd like to see and what is missing from the following statements. The grant flow charts, this would be something that would have to be created. We could provide, if requested through FOI, we could provide a summary of our work order that tracks the grant revenue coming in and then what it was spent on. If there's a surplus, which account was it directed to? We're not allowed to get surpluses from grants. We've got to spend what we spend. If we actually underspend on a grant, more often than not, we've got to give back the amount that we didn't spend. So it's not as if you get a grant for a project that you've applied for. If you apply for the organics projects is a perfect one. We apply for 2/3 of that funding. We have to spend the money and then submit the invoices to the province to get it back. So it's not as if they just give us $6 million, and if we go and spend 4, it's gravy. We don't get to spend that 6 unless we actually spend the money. So we're on a budget that we've submitted as part of the grant application, and most of our grants are working. You've got to spend it, and then you submit the draw to the province to get the money back, or the feds, as it were, depending on who it is.
And from what I understand, most of these monies come with restrictions on what they can be spent on. So even if we have a greater need in another department, we actually can't use the money for what we really need versus, for instance, the mayor of Caswell wanting to spend money on the hospital and being refused.
Absolutely, yeah. The grant streams are very, very strict. Even our regular grant streams, like Community Works. So Community Works is the gas tax fund that's flowed from the federal government through UBCM to us as a local government.
So what would be an appropriate resistance to provincial government to actually be able to create an environment where we can allocate these funds to what we need versus what they're telling us to spend it on? How do we, instead of just always being in a state of compliance to whatever rules are dictated which have no benefit, how do we as a regional district create some pushback saying these monies, we have greater need in these other areas, and
Contact your area director to bring it to the board and start to lobby the province to make those changes. And a good example of that is the Community Works Fund. So for years, the Community Works Fund was not allowed to be used for anything related to fire halls, to fire services at all. You were not allowed to put a penny of that fund in there. And they've recently changed that. You can now use Community Works funding for fire hall infrastructure. So
And
there's
recreation.
in recreation, there's been a number of changes. Still can't use it for fire apparatus, which is a struggle for some, but there's been changes that have been made through discussion with local governments on where we need the funds spent. So I'd say the best place, if you see a grant fund that you think needs to be broader, that is provincial, contact your area director to bring something to the board, and staff can start working on lobbying efforts. We're going to UBCM in a couple of weeks, talking with ministers, talking with ministry staff, and that's the place where we usually get some traction on things like this.
I'm going to go back one step where you guys were talking about these budget meetings. Since obviously most of us have never attended one, exactly how is it that our presence in these budget meetings will create enough feedback for you in terms of being able to actually make adjustments on the budget? What is the process that would be required from us? I find things are too loosey-goosey. It's like even with this vote on the climate action thing, what is your parameters on how you're coming to your decision? Same with this budget meeting. If we show up and we just say, look, reduce our taxation, what does that accomplish? What is the process that we will actually empower us to be able to have influence on what is going on, that we can make sure that our directors are, as you said, listening to the residents, because that is the hierarchy. So I'm wanting some clarity on this, because what we're feeling is we engage in these discussions. There's actually no kind of boundary or line that we see that what our input is actually creating any kind of influence. There's no parameters. It just becomes a personal decision. And how does this actually roll out?
So I have a couple thoughts.
Yes.
So, okay, first, I hate to say this, you don't want 20 people like me on a regional board. I mean, I'm an engineer, project manager, multi-million-dollar huge projects for 46 years of construction and design, right? You don't just want me, but you need enough people like me who run the numbers, who have a budget, who've always had a budget, who've had a contingency, my contingency, not to give away because it's there, and to manage it. So you need people who are as Andy Davidoff puts it, analytical. But not everybody in your board's going to be that way, and it's a good thing. So part of what I do, even though I'm pretty analytical, like it or not, is I've always sought out community champions as sounding boards. So sometimes it's your alternate director who can be very useful in this kind of stuff. Don Howie comes to mind when we're really trying to turn...
I'm asking more about these budget meetings where you're asking the public to come.
In the meeting, so Don Howie would show up year after year. He has similar background to me, retired, and we would talk about the pressures in the community, what community understands, what they value, what they don't value, and work from that kind of thing. So often, we govern in rural areas, I govern in rural areas, through community champions, who can at least help me understand a little better what is of less or no value to many people. That doesn't mean we're not going to do it, we're going to try and do less of it. But that's how I can ground myself in terms of values. Talking to lots of people, lots of active minds, community champions. Plus, I always look at the numbers to make sure you don't do the, well, we had $800 in this line item, but it was $953, so let's round it to 1,000. So
my question is about when we attend these budget meetings, how do you want us to come prepared so that we are actually going to have the ability to influence the decisions that are going on with
what you value and what you think is of less value. That's what I want to hear.
Okay.
And then also where I'm unable, I started to say, to look at numbers where money just got kind of rounded up and just kind of little money parked here and there. That's how we get accumulated surpluses in part. Another part is staff walk away and there's no one to pay. Or we shut something down and the bills go down. And we've already taxed before the government said shut down. But you need a level of awareness, a community that maybe extends well beyond your director's awareness, and you need to tell me what you value. But it's not just you. I need to hear from enough people. People are still saying we want more lake access, more trails. They cost more money, and now we have another staff because of
Okay,
it.
can I
Tell
get
me what's
Cheryl
valued.
to answer this?
I'll tell you what I know because I was only elected in November, and then the budgets come very quickly. So you're, as a new director, you're really into a situation where like you're not really well prepared for it. But I can tell you, to the Area E residents that are here, I opposed every one of the hiring staff requests, and I asked to be recorded, with the exception of two, which was the building ones that Gary suggested would be funded through permit fees. I've opposed the hiring of the person for the climate plan, and I did these things because I feel like this is what the majority of the residents in my area want, to my understanding, because they're telling me they want less taxation. With my limited knowledge at the time for the 2023 financial plan, I funded REC 10, and I don't know if you guys remember, but there was an alternative approval process last year in REC 10 that went, you weren't part of it and blew it, but anybody else from Area E, there was an approval process that came through that said we're going to tax for REC 10. And I didn't even know what it was, so we funded it through a community development grant to reduce that taxation, to give me some time to figure out what it was. The other thing we funded was the economic development, which affects all of Area E. We all pay into it, and I'm funding that to reduce taxation through a community development grant as well, because I could. So those were the only things that I could figure in a very short period of time to do, and I've been spending the rest of the time trying to learn and understand the functions and finances of the regional district, and to that is part of why I'm here today, and partly why I've asked Stuart he came out to my office to help me in the start to try to learn this, and I've also asked him for another meeting because I still need to learn more. There's a lot here, okay, like I run a company, and my company does about $3 million a year. And I used to work at BC Gas, and we handled a massive budget there. So I've seen them before, but this is just, the way that it's done is just not something that I'm accustomed to, but I'm doing my best. And I take an oath to you all, to all of the people in the regional district. And that's what I'm going to try and do. I have 3 years and 3 months left, who's counting? And I just want you to know that the board is made up of all different kinds of people. There are 20 people on the board, and the board does not agree on all of the decisions that are made. So that's okay. The world is made up of all different kinds of people, right? And we all need to live together and work together. So we're all trying, but just for the benefit of the Area E residents, since there's a large number of them, I think 5 I counted here today, I just wanted you guys to know from me, like what I'm doing and what I'm trying to do.
Well, and we know that because you're communicating with us. But I mean, the feedback that I've gotten from the public is this is a whole nother language that the general public does not understand. And so that's why you don't have the engagement. Because people come in and this doesn't make sense to them. They don't have the education about it. And so it becomes very overwhelming.
Area has the highest engagement in our public budget meetings, period, has for years.
If I could comment on something and bring what Gary and Cheryl just said together, is that from an elected official perspective, I don't think it's fair to put Cheryl in a position where you just say as residents, no more taxes. Because whether we fundamentally disagree with this or not, the regional district provides value.
Specific guidelines for us to come.
Whether it's fire protection, whether it's so just a second.
Tell us the guidelines.
Whether it's fire protection, whether it's recreation, whether it's resource recovery, we provide value. And just saying no more taxes, you now have your elected official at the table who's just saying no to something without determining what that value is, right?
So
what value am I voting on?
Back to my original question. I am going to bring this back.
So that's exactly what you need to come to the meeting with. You need to be able to understand what we're spending the money on, where that money is going, what services, who's paying for it, how it's allocated out, how it might impact you or impact your neighbors, where that value is. And then say, I disagree with this, or I agree with this. It's not about just coming in and saying nothing, no how, no way, because it doesn't, all that does is put all the pressure on the elected official to guess where that money should be spent or where it shouldn't be spent. If you can come in knowing what we're going to be spending the money on. And our budget process starts with a history of the regional district. Talks about how we're extremely unique. We're the only province in Canada that has regional districts. We're the only province in Canada that has districts
Bring it back.
where municipalities sit at the table. Any other district system only has the rural areas and the municipalities in there. We have very good partnerships. And I've been through all that on the.
Okay, I'm gonna bring this back again to my original question, because this needs to be very clear and specific, and we're not getting that. When we show up at these budget meetings, how do you want us to submit our perspectives to you so that we actually have influence? Now, you've just said you don't want us showing up saying taking taxation down. Okay, so we know that.
No, I
they
never
don't
said
want
that.
us to tell. That's not what they want us to say. But I want to hear specifically 3 things that we need to construct on paper and verbally so that our wishes are being brought across. Tell us that. 3 very short, simple sentences.
So I didn't say don't show up and say no taxation. I said don't show up and say just no taxation. Come with support as to what you want. Understand what we're spending the money on.
We're trying.
Tell us whether or not you agree with it. I don't think you need a third.
Yes.
Okay.
Do you value it, and what do you not value about what you do? And
You look like you want to say something, Jim.
I'm thinking. I mean, I think what I'm gathering from talking to people, I talk to a ton of people, I know that's shocking to you, is people want the RDCK at the very least to hold steady, not keep enlarging.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are speaking very strongly. They want you to retract. Now, I asked you 5 years ago, I said, hold the line, moratorium on hiring, live within your budgets like the rest of us have to do. And I understand, Stuart, it may not be you. And I know I'm going to blame the politicians, even though, in a sense, they're innocent babes in this, because you guys can overwhelm them with input, right? Which you do. When you give them, when Amy Watson says, I got to read 6,000 pages in a month, that's insane.
So I had something in the middle of that and I lost it. It was around expansion and staffing and where things come from. And I'm not going to say that don't blame me. Like I'm running an organization this size. Staff is going to come to me with the pressures they're feeling. But I also think the reason I say determine understand what we're spending the money on and then come with the yay or nay as to whether or not you agree with it is because the directors, when it comes to operations, they don't hear, someone doesn't call them up and say, I just had this planning application come through, it's gone fantastic, it's met my timelines. I don't think you need any more staff in planning. Nobody makes those phone calls to elected officials. You hear the other side. I've been waiting 2 months for my development variance permit. Where is it? I've been waiting 8 months for my building permit. Where is it? Those are the ones they hear. So that when the staff discussion starts, it's we need more staff, and that's
or you need more efficient staff. I've been a business owner. I'm going to
ignore that one. So it really comes down to the struggles that we have with meeting that operational timeline with the people that call the directors saying this is unacceptable. And maybe it's an expectation of the public that we try to get. If you're doing a build that's starting on July 1st, please don't put your permit in on April 30th, unless it's the year before, because that timeline is what we're trying to manage. And if we could have the public understanding what we need in order to process it, we wouldn't necessarily need to come. Like we've got a permit for someone that needs something done for Labor Day, and they put that permit in on July 9th. And we have it littered throughout our documentation that it's a minimum 8 to 10 weeks to get a permit right now. So
I understand all that.
It's really frustrating juggling all that.
What I'm looking for, and I haven't seen in the 5 years I've been watching it, right, is I don't see an effort. I don't see a individual whose job is to, let's look at our efficiency. Let's look at how can we cut this. There's none of that. It's all upward and onward.
And I might add an observation. Stuart just said, I'm going to ignore that. That is not a communication tool.
When someone
you
calls
say
my
that to
staff
someone who
inefficient,
brings up an efficient,
when someone calls my
valid point.
staff inefficient without any support on that, that is something I'm not going to respond to.
Question efficiency.
Okay?
She's merely
Because we have
questioning the efficiency.
extremely
That's all she's
efficient,
doing.
hardworking staff at the organization, and that's not why we're here. Okay, if you want to send me an email berating staff, go ahead and do it.
I'm merely
but
pointing
I've got
out.
a half hour left
I'm
here.
merely pointing out.
No one was
And
berating
that-
Said we were
staff.
going to talk over each other, and
Okay.
Ellen has
Really-
been patient.
Okay,
and has
Ellen.
her
I
hand up,
understand we
up.
have a communication director. There's obviously a problem with communication between the people and the RDCK. Perhaps your communication director should be meeting with all of us to find out how we want to have information sent to us. And perhaps at these kind of situations, you've been so wonderful to explain things to us. You should be there with the communication director so that we have better communication to know what is really going on. Our lives right now we're being bombarded with so much information and I'll tell you, there are people in my neighborhood are really struggling, and you need to know that we need to get this under control.
So if there is ways that we can communicate better, by all means, our lines are always open. You can go on the website, you can email me directly from the website.
What have we got for our communication director? I think you hired him a year ago or whatever it is.
Oh no, our communications person's been in place. We're on our second one. Our first one left the organization and moved back to Ontario.
Because I haven't seen anything. I looked for press releases by him or anything, or even soliciting information. And I understand when an organization hires a press liaison, whatever, it's to put out your side, your version of the thing. But I didn't see anything. So what are we getting for that money?
Yeah.
So we're getting a lot for that money.
Tell me what it is.
Let's go. We're writing it down.
Our website is the best place you can go for everything you just mentioned. Press releases, board highlights, and we are in the middle of updating it. I hope by the end of the year we've got some traction on doing that to make it a little bit more user-friendly.
It is
Well,
totally unusual.
That's not
Social
okay.
media.
Walmart, if I want to see what's on sale at Walmart, I don't have to go to their website. It's in my face and it's everywhere.
Yeah,
Be
So-
in my face. Be everywhere.
yeah.
Okay, so how?
I don't know.
Do a
How
Facebook
about
page.
the boards?
We have a
They-
Facebook page.
You
Yeah,
have a
but you
Facebook
don't
page?
We have a
post.
Facebook page.
Okay.
You don't
Friend
post
us all.
on you no. It's not a friend. It's a page.
Put it
You
in the
post on
Valley
your
Voice.
page. Post on in communities.
Yeah.
You don't post anywhere. You just post on your page. That's not advertising. That's like,
Barely
hey,
at all.
come check me out.
Yeah.
You're not out there in our faces.
If you,
And in the
if you
Valley
follow
We
the
have
page-
page. We have
Sorry?
Facebook.
And in
One
the
at a
Valley
time.
Voice.
We advertise in the Valley Voice.
We have Facebook pages for Thrums, for Terry's, for Blewett, for Nelson, for Castlegar. You don't post there. Is your communication director
Okay, I'm sorry,
social?
I'm going to step
So I
in
can
here
take that
because-
note. We can do that.
Just a minute, because I do a weekly newsletter for Area E. I post it every Friday. I've done 37
Area
editions.
E. I know.
We post them on 4 social media sites. And
But you're the only
group.
one.
Yeah, you're the only one.
I think I'm gonna lose
They're not in
it.
our faces. What about all the boards by the community halls with letters? Why don't you post there? It's free.
Okay, great feedback. Thank you.
I think
This
part
has
of
been brought up
it
to
has
you
be
before. Why
simplified.
hasn't it been used yet? I don't
For the
know.
budget, we need is it called a synopsis? You know, a 1-page or a 2-page synopsis of the budget. This is where we're going. Remember, I talked to you about this before because the East Kootenai was putting out a synopsis, right? And I asked several times, do you do it here? And you don't do it. And I'm a carpenter by trade, cabinet maker. I don't follow all this stuff. I can't follow your thing. I try, but it's just too overwhelming, and I got a life as well, right? You unfortunately don't have a life. That's this is the guy who emails you at 11 o'clock
Well, the
at night.
reality is that it almost feels, I'm not going to state that it is. It almost feels it's deliberate to make this so ununderstandable that no one can question what's going on. Now, I know for myself, I printed off every single financial statement, every document that was available on the website, and it sat on my kitchen table with highlighters, and I had accountants over, and we sat for hours looking at different things and putting it together. That was 3 people with some level of education, me less than the other guys, but definitely we were all able to spot things. 2 weeks to come up with kind of a little bit of an analysis of what is going on. The facts are the public is not going to have that level of understanding, and as a result, there is this wall between the public knowing what's going on and the operations of what's going on behind these walls. All we know is the public now is organically all over this region starting to organize themselves and communicate back because they're saying, you've hit a wall. We're responding. So we're coming to you, sending off the signals, letting you know that we have hit a point in time where there has to be a shift. You can choose to do this or not. But we're going to tell you that if it doesn't start shifting, there is going to have to be an escalation on our part, which, considering none of us are getting paid, this creates, starts to create a level of resentment. We don't want to get into that territory because, as you said, we're all in the same community. We are trying to work together, but it seems like we're doing more work than what the staff are here. So my job is to communicate that to you, that on the public side, there is some pushback occurring, and I'm hoping that your antennas are picking up on this.
I'd like to get through at least the next page and a half
Can I make one
of
comment
this.
here? As a new director with the budgets, like if you were following my newsletter, you would have seen my explanation of it that I further posted on my website that had the graphs, the pie charts that the regional district made, which was the easiest way for you to see where your taxation dollars were going, and they were split out, and I did my best to get that out to the public. So we're trying, right?
You're trying.
You're trying.
You're trying.
You're trying.
You're
trying.
Some irritating person who wanted pie charts because it's a simple representation.
Okay, I do want to get to the HB mines.
Yep, HB mine. When was the land purchased? I think it was in the late 90s.
Josh was on it. Josh Schmink said
Into late 90s.
I moved here in '97, so I'm
Yeah.
gonna get an answer out of me for when.
Community consultation, to my knowledge, there wasn't any. Under the bylaw for a Central Resource Recovery Service, we'd be allowed to purchase land for the purposes of operating the landfill, which is why that land was purchased.
For landfill?
For landfill purposes, because our landfill neighbors that property. And we required a buffer because our landfill was encroaching too close to the property line. That was the reason for the purchase of that property.
So it's that same question.
Sorry,
If
on
that's
the highway, like going to Selma, up that way?
Yeah.
If that same question came up today, knowing what you know, would you proceed with that?
Knowing what I know,
Just the liabilities.
I actually don't know the answer to that question because back in the 90s, I don't know what the alternative was in terms of cost.
Fair enough.
I don't know the cost of saying, what would we have to do on the landfill in terms of a liner underneath, which are extremely expensive to do. I don't know what the alternative
I'm just
would be.
wondering, were we pressured by the province into this?
I don't know the answer to that. I wasn't around. In terms of where we are now with the property and having to remediate it, it's not directly related to the fact that we purchased it. The problem is there's been two major freshet events that have compromised that facility. So the tailings facility, if that dam broke, the highway would be washed out going down there. So the reason that we're undertaking the project to remediate it is to avoid that liability in the
Or you
regional
could
district
use-
because it's a heck of a lot more than we're spending on the
You
property.
could say that the reason we're stuck with it.
Yeah, we're stuck with that, absolutely.
Why is this not a provincial issue rather than our issue?
Because it's a provincial issue in the sense that from the Ministry of Mines, we have to meet their requirements for remediation, but they never own the property, and they're not required to remediate it directly. The owner is.
It was Tech, right, that owned it?
So Tech owned it. Obviously, there was no reports done prior to the sale to show the contamination.
I don't know the answer to that. I'm not privy to the sale documents or what was provided at the time. I was 15 years away from joining the organization.
So to simplify it, would it seem reasonable that Tech should be responsible for the contamination costs?
It's definitely been suggested.
It's illegal.
Okay, so then how do we as the public put pressure on that cost is making them responsible for it rather than us?
I think you leave it to the processes that are currently in place.
How long has the process been in motion? When was it initiated?
2012, 2013.
So we're 10 years and it still hasn't gone through the process.
We're getting there.
If for some reason it's they are responsible for those costs, how is that money going to be reabsorbed to the residents that have had to pay up front?
It would go into the service and take costs out of the service. So right now we're paying for the remediation of the property through a long-term borrowing. We would basically pay off that loan, and the annual loan costs, which I think are $200,000 to $300,000, maybe a bit more, would be wiped off the next 25 years. So that's where the residents would see that savings.
So for the last 10 years, the people that have had to pay for this are not going to get any compensation?
We didn't take out the loan until 2019. It's been for the past 4 years that the loan's been paid. I can't remember when the AAP was around that. We did go to the public for that loan.
Okay,
Yeah.
so again, whenever this gets settled, 5-10 years from now, you're stating that the people that have already had to pay for the remediation costs, there's going to be no compensation to them?
It would be through reduced taxation should they still live in the area. Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to watch for that media release.
Since you can't discuss, really what's going on, would it be in your interest from the people that are here, knowing that we're pretty upset about this situation, to tell our lawyers for the RDCK that there is a major movement of the people here that want this settled?
I think there's a major movement with staff and the board that want it settled as well.
So
So
they need to know,
that's
the public
well
needs
taken.
to know.
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
So you say you still have a load on this?
We have a loan for the project work to remediate the property. So what we're trying to do is shore up the facility, make sure that it's not going to fail under heavy rains and cause even more costs. Because if there was something that happened, all those costs, again, borne by the service, and you're looking at, I don't even know what the number would be, but it would be pretty hefty.
So this decommissioning the garbage dumps, to
Yep.
me, is under the same category. We're paying costs on, I sat in one joint recovery meeting where they were talking about the costs associated with a much older landfill that is no longer working, but we're paying those liability costs as well. So I'm not understanding why so much money has to be set aside if we're actually, I see how much you're spending on environmental consultants. I would assume that we're actually doing best practice standards right now. So why is there so much money being required from us to cover potential liability costs?
So just a correction, you indicate here, why is there so much money collected for the landfill liability? We don't have that $36 million in the bank. That's a liability that's a liability at a point in time. So we have to record the liability on our financial statements to say that if we suddenly got out of the business of landfilling today, we would have to spend $36 million to remediate the properation under provincial legislation in order to move on from it.
Why?
So that
If you're doing best practice, why do you have to be remediation?
That is best practice. You collect the garbage, you landfill it, and then after a period of time, you've got to remediate that. So that includes capping, that includes vegetation, it includes all the stuff that you need to close a landfill. And right now, if we were to close it today, based on the amount of garbage that we've got in there, it would cost us $36 million. We don't have that $36 million right now.
From what I saw in the financial statements, it looked like you were collecting a certain amount every year.
There's an amount being put into the reserves based on again on best practices to try to spread that cost out.
So we are paying for that annually.
Yes, you would be paying for that through reserves, but a fraction of what this $36 million
And there's a statutory requirement to take some of the money and put it in reserve, because even once you're done and closed and everything is capped and looks good, you still have to continue to monitor and do certain things to the landfill for 200 years, some outrageous amount of time. So there's a statutory requirement, legal requirement, for that reserve to be established, so that when everyone walks away and we no longer landfill garbage, yeehaw, when that day comes, that we're no longer doing that, there's still something to be tended at that site for the benefit of anybody in that area. So there's different reserves that again, explanation if you want to have the cup of coffee. Learn a little more about that.
I understand the reserves. I see the amount that's being put in every year. So we're asking why it is so high over the period of this long-term maintenance of it, when if we are actually, and the fact that we're paying for costs of landfills that we weren't even participating in before, yet we're paying the costs on that. So these are issues that we're having trouble with, that there are expenses going on that are not related to us, yet we're paying this, and we're just aware.
We must be paying legal fees over many, many years for this mine as well. And I'm personally, I'm against that. I want it settled.
How much are we into? About that?
12.
12 million? That's been spent already.
Yeah. Yeah, probably pretty close to that. Don't hold me on that.
Including legal fees?
Yeah, that would include legal fees.
And can you tell me which legal firms we're using?
No.
Like, are they local or are they outside of the area? That's all I need to know.
They specialize in the Environmental Management Act. That's what I'll say.
Okay.
Well, $12 million would buy a lot of sprinklers for everybody living in the fire area. It would put one on everybody's home.
2,000 parcels and already 80. We wouldn't buy them for everybody.
Well, whatever.
We're
We'll
big.
buy a lot of them.
We're a big territory.
Oh, they're 50. You can get some in bulk.
On these list of expenditures, are what is the
I
best
think it might be
way-
better if I just email that to you. I've got
Yes.
them all written down, but there's no point in me reading them out and having you write them down.
Okay.
So I can send those to you.
Can I get copied on that, please?
Yeah.
Thank you.
And then this integrated sustainability consultants.
So that's our HB Mine contractor. Definition of sustainability, you'd have to ask them. It's their company. I don't know what they refer to as
Yeah, it's just
sustainability.
their name. It's fashion.
No, what is RDCK define sustainability as? Because it's in a lot of your communications. So
What did you define sustainability as?
yes.
I think I'd have to take that back and talk to my staff on that one.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'd like that one as well.
Well, how could we define the word resilience?
There's a lot of political language that is very vague and ambiguous, and so we're just stating that, yeah, this is kind of maybe what you guys are used to around the table, but it's not cutting it for the public.
So the severance, all I can say is they're in line with employment standards. I can't really speak to that.
Number 9.
For the legal actions at number 10. Number 11 is a big discussion because it has been a huge item for the board to deal with is fire
Yes.
protection. We're required in Blewett, in Beasley, in the Slocan Valley, we're required to meet the same standard there as you are in Metro Vancouver. And you've got these small tax bases with fire protection that was set up years ago on a good community basis with people volunteering and showing up, and it's completely changed. And the struggle to keep up financially, if you add up all the increases in fire protection over that time frame where you're looking at that $10 million increase, I bet you fire protection is a good portion of that. Because we've seen our fire protection budgets balloon because of the standards we need to meet for equipment, for work safe, for training, for, recruitment and retention around starting to pay our firefighters for their time. It's been a huge, huge issue at the board table. It's been a huge issue for residents, I know, from a tax perspective.
So I'm very aware of the increased regulations around everything. We're also very aware that the use of our equipment is not nearly the use that would occur in urban areas. I do find it challenging where an attitude of government is whatever the province tells you, you just do. I mean, for us, we actually find it quite effective to say, well, no, we're not. We're not going to do that. So we're not going to replace equipment that has less than 100,000 kilometers on it. It doesn't matter what the age is. It's functional. We'll have it inspected. It shows it's functional. And we are not going to just keep complying with this regulation. And that is something that we need to start building up in terms of local government, because the province is full of people who are not aware of what it's like in rural areas. And so decisions are made that impact us, that are irrational, and we need to be able to somehow construct some kind of resistance, saying we're not going to follow everything you say because it costs our people money and there's no reason for it. So this is something that needs to be introduced into how we respond to these
So we
regulations.
do that. We try to extend the life of the trucks as long as we can. The problem is that it can't just be continually inspected. It will fail. And then we are in a position where we don't have the apparatus, the approved apparatus to respond to an incident. Fire Underwriters Survey is the one who guides that. They will then declare that we don't have fire protection in the area and can't respond. And that's the pinch that we get into. But we go from everything from getting, an extra 5 years on trucks that have a lot of kilometers, or that don't have much kilometers on them and not a lot of use. We buy used trucks where we can to keep the costs down. We try everything we can in the fire service to keep costs at the level that meets regulations where we can respond, but we try to keep that cost low. We're not going out and buying $800,000 fire trucks at every moment. We're trying to get trucks, City of Nelson, Town of Creston, they have tighter restrictions where they might have to replace a truck after 15 years instead of 25. It's got 10 years on it. We buy that truck for $130,000 and we get 10 more years, maybe another 5 at the end of that with another certification bump. So we try our best to keep those fire budgets and work within the rules that are set on us.
And there's
Absolutely.
limits of where they can attend to, like it's a 13-kilometer limit. That's as far as they can go. Who sets that?
Fire Underwriter Survey.
Free enterprise.
Yeah.
That's insurance underwriters?
Yeah, they are the creature of the insurance companies that go around from province to province literally and look for faults or holes or problems and take us to task about whether or not the residents get that insurance discount. So again, do you value
We
your
have
insurance?
3
Do
fire
you value your
insurance
insurance
responders
discount?
within 13 kilometers.
Yes.
So we have City of Nelson, we have Blewett, and we have Beasley.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, so you're saying it is kilometer based?
No, there's several things, but the distance is quite important. You go to a city, there's kilometers and time. You go to a city, if you're 13 kilometers from one end to the other end of Calgary, you're not going to get down to the fire before the house is burned down in the whole block. Here's more complicated. Please don't be simplistic. The point is,
But I like being simplistic. Can we get rid of one of these fire stations?
do you value your insurance deduction? Because if you don't value it, we can have our systems operating, our fire services operating the most minimal, like a brigade, like some of them in some of the rural areas, the informal brigades. They may or may not help you out, but you won't get the insurance deduction. If you value that,
Let's
tell
go
us
back
if you
to
value that.
Blewett, Beasley, and Nelson. So we have 3 fire stations within 13 kilometers. We're going to meet the criteria for
No,
the
they-
underwriters.
They go beyond
the
edges, are going beyond.
They might be within 13 kilometers of each other, but Beasley can now go up and cover Bonington up the slope. Blewett can't.
So you're gonna
right?
tell-
So you might have a little bit of
There's
overlap
Crescent
in it.
Valley for Bonington.
Crescent Valley Crescent Valley does come into Area F going along the lake, but there's a fine line as to when it stops for the 13K.
Well, we
But
probably
we
have
couldn't
one
get
too
up
many
on
fire
One more,
stations.
the important thing here for taxation purposes is that you only pay for the one that services your
Well,
property.
actually, Blewett, I see on the Beasley one, we're on
They're a
both.
combined service.
Because they're a
Beasley,
combined service,
Beasley
so
are
yeah.
one.
Yeah,
Harrison
so
But they're
Valley
separate
is
budgets.
one.
They are separate. We do track those budgets completely separate.
But you'll see it just as one, but you're only paying until, like, you're paying your 1 rate per thousand, that's it for the property. And if you own another property somewhere else, like, then it would be charged under a different service, if it has fire service. But a lot of things, if you're trying to buy a house and you need a mortgage, your mortgage might require that you have fire protection. And if you don't have fire protection there, you can't get the mortgage.
Well, the insurance would be the issue, the cost of the insurance. But if you don't value it, you don't value that deduction, that decrease in your insurance, and you've done all your homework and you're happy with that, tell us that you don't want a fire service. As for doing what the province says, Riendo Water System Treatment Plant is a poster child, because we didn't do what the government said there, and it's been functioning just fine for a long time, and we didn't get the official construction permit with all the redundancy as required, and someday they're going to try and get us, I know you're recording us, when we go to expand or change or do something and ask for a future construction permit, but we do not always just do stuff, and more examples come to mind. There'll be cup of coffee examples. Why would we do what a government says to do today when the next government might do something else? Like inspecting every shed, barn, or outbuilding and every rural property just in case someone has a welder and they have a commercial operation in there, and so that's a threat or a risk to community. Well, in municipalities and villages that are compact, Salmo can do that. We can't do that, and we're not doing it. However, that's been suggested for how long now, Stuart? So we don't just go along like sheep.
There's a couple for sure that I want to answer. How much time do we have?
About 5 minutes.
I can blast
16 and 17 for sure.
Okay, I'll just blast through discretionary grants. They're available on every single agenda, but you can't FOI them. They're, if you want to, but they are on every single agenda. Application, purpose of the grant, where it's coming from is on every single board agenda.
Angie's December summary is very useful. I give that out all the time.
Oh, okay.
Because
Yeah, we
tells
could
you
do
all
that.
the grants
Yeah.
as of that end of year,
Yeah, that
12
won't
months at a time.
That won't have the
Easy to
application,
digest.
but it'll have the society that it went to.
Tells you amount
so
and
we could provide that. Consolidated emergency programs is our emergency management program. So that's
Yeah, just go to 16 and 17.
uh,
Actually, 15, 16, 17.
15. This was a lot of reopening, cleaning supplies in the rec centers that we were required to do. We had, when they made us do the vaccine checks, we had security at a couple of our rec centers. We had signage for separation and all that stuff that was in there. We paid our WebEx fees there for our virtual meeting software, which was way too expensive, and we're hoping to get rid of that cost when we move over to Microsoft 365 because Teams will allow us to get rid of that cost. Grant account is not audited. It's not specifically audited. The expenses form part of the scope of the audit. So if the auditor shows it as a sample, we'd have to provide that detail, but it's not specifically audited. That's what that statement means, is that they didn't sit there, look at the grant as a specific item in a silo and say, we're going to audit everything in here. But all those transactions were part of our audit scope. It's not like they were ignored, anything like that. 16, this is a factor of 2020 being so low. In 2020, we had to close our rec facilities. We had to lay off staff.
2020 were closures?
In 2020 were closures. We closed March 16th, 2020. We closed all of our rec centers. And they were closed for the majority of that year. So that's why there was such a bump in 2021, because we were reopening. There was more revenue. There was more cost with bringing people back and being open again. So that was that item. 17, we got a $2 million grant from the province to build a child care facility at our Castlegar Rec Center. So that facility is right next door to the Castlegar Rec Complex. And again, that grant, much to what you said before, Corrine, about being used for a very specific purpose, that was for child care infrastructure.
And how much is it being used?
I think it's full. I'd have to check on that, but I think it's full.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do we have a recent report on the success of the recycling program? I brought this up in a recovery meeting. I submitted a question saying, when was the latest review done on the actual success of this program? Because I was aware that things like glass that were being toted as being recycled were actually ending up in the landfill. My question was just sort of, they did acknowledge that glass was in the landfill, but nobody ever responded to my question about providing a report on how it's actually functioning.
So a good resource would be Recycle BC. They're the stewards of the recycling program. So basically how recycling works in BC is that if you produce that glass bottle, as a producer, you're supposed to be paying into a fund that would support covering the recycling of it. Now, over the years, the board has been very vocal about how that RDC model doesn't work very well in a rural area because we're so spread apart. We have to have recycling depots in Marblehead. We've got, Marblehead to Weimar to Edgewood. We're all over the place. So the cost of recycling in our area is significantly high. And it doesn't get covered by the rebates that are coming from RBC for the material. So they would have an annual report. They would have an annual report on where the product goes and what it does.
But we want to know, is it working here? Are these the things that the public is putting all the bins, is this just another illusion? Or is this recyclable stuff actually getting to where it needs to? Are we actually, the money that we're putting into this program, are we actually having things recycled, or is it just ending up in the dump?
No, it's being recycled. There are some contaminated loads that do end up in the landfill, and that would be something that we'd have to get from our contractor in terms of how often that happens. But the majority of stuff does get recycled. Yes.
Where does the plastic go? It used to go offshore, but I understand it doesn't anymore. Where does it go?
BC's requiring it to be reprocessed or used, and it's going all the lower mainland, I believe. There's a percentage of plastic that's being incinerated at Burnaby, I believe, because of the contamination.
1 minute.
And that level is in those reports, as I look at them every year. Things like glass, Mansfield used to take glass from all over the place there in Innisfil for insulation. Got more expensive to truck it there than what they would give us for it. So the glass isn't in the landfill. The glass is ground and added to the gravel to provide firm surfaces as you're moving over the soft dirt with big trucks. As you
Well,
dump.
Amy Watson said that
it's
it
a
was
different
being stockpiled in
It's
the landfill.
used at the landfill.
So some of the plastic's being recycled, but a lot of it's being burned.
I don't know the percentage. I think it's a
Yeah,
small
I
percentage.
haven't been able to find any numbers on it because I know the offshore accounts ended.
Check the Recycle BC website. They're required to provide an annual report on what.
So I'll make a personal comment with regards to the recycling being in the rural area. Since it's changed, and I'm not super proud of saying it, but I recycle less because it's more complicated.
In terms of the sorting.
In terms of the sorting, but in terms of where can I return this? So the styrofoam can be picked up, the plastic can be picked up, and whenever I go to my station that's close by, it's closed. And so I'm traveling, trying to get rid of my recycling, and it's closed, and so my recycling ends up in the garbage. So you failed me.
Yeah, the closure would be on us for sure.
The system is not working
for me.
for
The requirements, that's all Recycle BC. They have what's called core depots, and then we have satellite depots. The core depots take the plastic, take the styrofoam, take the glass. The satellite depots take everything else.
So if we find out that they're actually not conducting themselves in the standard that we're expecting, then are we going to be deflected from RDCK when we say we have concerns about how that business is doing, and then we're going to hear, sorry, that has nothing to do with us?
It's everything to do with us. Every year for how many years I've talked to Minister George Heyman specifically about this and how it has to work better in rural areas. It is mindlessly stupid to tell mom and pop businesses that their cardboard box has to be collected under a contract because it's institutional commercial and goes somewhere different than your cardboard box that you bought at mom and pop's grocery store. We've had an ongoing conversation. We have had traction. They've made some small changes. They keep promising larger changes. It's not a small topic, and it's not something we're deflecting.
Good. I just needed to clarify that.
Okay, I've got a couple things. So
the time's up. We got to be quick here.
Okay, satellite recycling places should have a sign for when they're open, so people are aware, rather than go there with a whole car or a truck full and see it's closed.
Okay.
And regarding your pumps, and this I know because my husband's a plumber and a pump installer.
Yes.
Pumps age, but they age more when they're being used, not just sitting there.
I know. Yes, I know.
Can I get a list of the 35 new proposed projects under the Climate Action Plan? Because we're finding this whole thing so vague. We don't know what you're actually trying to create, where the money's going, how much it's going to cost, and that's part of our anxiety in this.
Sure.
They're actually marked on the plan. See these little green things that say new?
Yeah.
That's what they are.
Yes.
So if you went
But
through
what's
this,
the specific?
I know, but if you went through them, that's where they are green. They're
Yes.
in the new.
Those
Yeah,
are-
you can see I've been through this a few times.
And mine's less pretty because it's all scribbled out. It's exactly the same.
The interesting thing is when I look at how these things in the Climate Action Plan are going to be implemented, especially the increase in electricity that's required. So I contacted Fortis and I've talked to them at length. And to make a very long story short, they basically say, we don't know, we're working on it. And I'm like, so plans are being implemented on a local level, provincial level, and a federal level, and yet the people that are going to be supplying us with this limitless source of power really, at this point, really have no idea how they're going to do it. So I see a certain level of obsequiousness by our governments. They're just going along with this model, and it's based on what exactly? I mean, power company themselves are saying, we don't know.
I have,
like, wow, that's a little intimidating, I think, for all of us.
I have 2 formal requests, and I don't know how you guys want to process this, but I do want director votes documented for yes or no, who voted yes or no, and it has to be put up on the agenda meetings. I've been looking at other government's systems, and they do document who is making what vote. I think as a level of transparency to the public, somehow, how would you like me to put this as a formal request? Is this just that something that Cheryl submits as she puts as a resolution to the agenda? Or what is the process where we, I have 2 requests that I'm formalizing
I'll look into that,
right
but
now.
absent that, send a note to Cheryl to get that process going.
Okay.
But I'll see if there's a different way.
And then we also, I asked before, via email to all the board of directors, nobody has responded to me. In terms of this climate action thing, I asked for a copy of the report from the BC government that shows that they have actually done a calculation of the demands that would be required for 2030 once they make all these changes, and that there is the ability that they can actually fill that demand.
Sorry, demands for power?
For power,
Okay.
yeah. And if we don't have actual documentation from the province to prove that they can fill the requirements, then there's absolutely no reason why we're even moving through with this climate action plan, because what is going to be required is not possible to provide. So I have, I would like a copy of that report, because I have somebody who is in upper levels of this that can read it and determine if it is legit. So those 2 things are my formal requests from you, and they are things that I would hope would be addressed very quickly.
Can I just make a couple comments? I guess everything here is historical, so it's a learning experience for everyone to get up to date with that. But I think going forward, what's really going to impact is the retrofit that's being passed down, government level. And I guess we're going to want to get more involved in the budgeting process to see what the cost is. So that's what we want to do, is we want to attend your budget meetings and that, because whatever is historical, that's done and passed. But we just want to get more involved and be part of that input, so that it's just not forced upon us where we have to comply. So we just want to work with you guys and the process so we can understand it better.
Thank you. I'd like to just share this. I hope it's appropriate, but I was listening to a climate expert named Alan McRae, and he said, I have to paraphrase because I can't remember his terminology, but he said, you know, how the carbon goes into the...
Probably not appropriate right now. Oh, sorry.
Well, just that he was saying that there's absolutely no need for carbon tax in Canada.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would like to see feasibility reports. And I'd like them published before we would come to budget meetings.
There's a very good chance, if you look at Europe as indicator of where this is going, that populations are rejecting these climate change things en masse. I mean, you look at Holland, France, Germany, Denmark, all backtracking on this. And I know, you know, this isn't a criticism. I realize you've been handed this. But a lot of this stuff we may not have to worry about too much, because I think it's going to be dumped. But we'll see.
I have a friend in Merritt who told me how government officials are going all over farmers' lands there and shutting off their wells and telling them you cannot water your fields and your gardens, and went into some farmer's place where they get their eggs and other stuff from, into the barn, and said, oh, you can't have 4 horses, you can only have 2. And there's a lot of things like that that are starting to happen that
the BC communities, for sure.
Yeah.
We're getting reports on
And yet the Prime Minister travels in his private jet. And it's no big deal. Let's not talk about
So
that.
Stuart, you're off the list for private jet.